The shattered moon hung in the sky like a broken lantern, its surface scarred by centuries of war. Fire and smoke rose from the battlefield below, where metal and flesh lay scattered together. Among the wreckage, Sergeant Marcus Hale staggered forward, his armor cracked, his rifle nearly out of charge. He had lost count of how many times death had almost claimed him in the last few hours. His platoon was gone, every one of them cut down when the ambush hit. He should have been with them, buried under rubble or burned to ash, but somehow, through sheer stubbornness, he still moved. The air was heavy with the stench of plasma burns and blood. Strange alien banners, once bright with the colors of the Clith Dominion, now lay shredded in the dust. Marcus had never asked to be here. He was a soldier of the Terran Alliance, a man used to fighting small skirmishes on fringe colonies, not being thrown into the heart of a civil war between alien powers. But orders had dragged him here, and orders had killed his squad. He clenched his jaw and pressed on, because lying down meant dying. And Marcus Hale was not ready to die yet. It was then, as he pushed through the ruins of a half-collapsed tower, that he heard the faintest sound. Not the groan of metal or the hiss of leaking gas, but something softer, a voice weak, almost gone. Instinct made him raise his rifle, ready for another enemy soldier. But what he found stopped him cold. She was lying half-buried beneath slabs of stone, her ornate armor torn and bloodied yet still shining in places. Her skin glowed faintly with a pale blue hue, her eyes struggling to stay open. Marcus had seen images before, propaganda and intelligence briefings, but he recognized her at once. Princess Celira, heir of the Clith Dominion, the kind of figure people whispered about as untouchable. Untouchable in power and untouchable in beauty. And here she was, broken, dying, and abandoned. For a long second, Marcus stared. He could walk away. She was the enemy, after all. Saving her might mean betraying his own people. But then he remembered the look in her eyes. Not the sharp, proud gaze of royalty, but the helpless fear of someone about to be left behind. That look was human enough. Against every thought of reason, Marcus dropped his rifle and began pulling the stones off her body. The work was brutal. His muscles screamed with each heave, his hands torn on jagged metal. Celira tried to speak. Her words slurred in her native tongue, but he hushed her. "Save your strength," he muttered. She didn't understand the words, but she seemed to understand the tone. Inch by inch he freed her until finally he managed to lift her into his arms. She was lighter than he expected, fragile even, and yet the weight of what he was doing pressed down on him heavier than the rubble ever had. The battlefield was far from safe. Enemy patrols swept the ruins, searching for survivors. Marcus moved carefully, ducking through shadows, holding her close while his own blood dripped from a wound in his side. More than once he had to press his back to the wall as alien soldiers passed by, their weapons ready. If they saw him carrying their princess, they would not hesitate to cut him down. But Marcus did not falter. Step after step he carried her, guided by a single thought. She was alive because of him, and he would not let her die now. Celira's eyes opened wider the farther they went. She studied his face, the grit and exhaustion carved into it. She must have wondered why a human, a supposed lesser species in the eyes of her people, would go to such lengths for her. When Marcus stumbled and nearly fell, she weakly grasped his chest plate, steadying herself against him. For a moment their eyes locked and something passed between them. Not words, not even clear understanding, but something more primal. Trust. Hours dragged by as they crawled through wreckage and tunnels. Marcus's body ached, his throat dry, his vision blurred, but he pushed on. He found a half-destroyed shelter at the edge of the battlefield, a quiet hollow beneath twisted steel beams. There he set her down gently, checking her wounds with what little medical training he had. She winced when he tightened a torn strap to slow the bleeding, but she did not push him away. Instead, her fingers brushed against his hand, a silent gesture of gratitude. Exhaustion finally caught him. Sitting beside her, rifle across his lap, Marcus leaned back against the wall. He knew reinforcements might never come, and if the enemy found them, they would both be dead before dawn. But for the first time since the ambush, he felt something other than despair. He had saved someone important, someone who might change everything. The princess's breathing grew steadier as she drifted into uneasy sleep, and Marcus kept watch over her in the silence of the ruined world. Alone, wounded, and surrounded by enemies, the human soldier who should have been forgotten on a distant moon now held in his arms the future of an empire. He did not know what came next, All he knew was that her life was in his hands and he would not let go. When Princess Selira opened her eyes again, the world no longer burned. Instead, she found herself lying on a thin blanket in the shadow of twisted steel. The air was still heavy with smoke, but the heat of battle had passed. She turned her head slowly, every movement sending a sharp pain through her body, and saw the human soldier sitting nearby. His armor was damaged, his face pale from exhaustion, yet he was awake, watching the ruins with the steady alertness of a man who had not allowed himself to rest. For a long time, Selira said nothing. Her mind struggled to understand. She remembered the battlefield, the crushing weight of stone, and then his hands pulling her free. She remembered his arms carrying her, his voice murmuring words she did not know but somehow understood. She had been certain her life was ending, yet here she was, alive because of him. Marcus noticed her stirring and shifted closer. "Easy," he said quietly, his voice rough from thirst. He offered her a small canteen, the last of his water supply. She looked at it, then at him, confused. In her empire, no guard would ever drink after their princess, and yet, this man handed her what he had without hesitation. Slowly she drank, the taste of strange human water sharp on her tongue. She tried to speak, her words halting in his language. "Why, I saved me?" Her accent was heavy, but Marcus understood. He paused before answering, meeting her gaze. "Because you were alive." That was enough. It was a simple answer, almost crude compared to the polished speeches of her court, but it struck her harder than any ceremony ever had. He had not saved her for power or reward or obligation. He had saved her because he refused to let her die. Hours passed in uneasy silence. Marcus tended her wounds as best he could, tearing strips of cloth from his own uniform to bind them. Selira watched him carefully, noting the scars on his arms, the way his hands never shook even when blood seeped through the bandages. He was not gentle like her physicians, yet there was no hesitation in him. Every movement told her he had done this many times before, not for royalty, but for comrades. As the day turned to night, Selira found herself studying him more closely. Humans were considered rough, fragile creatures in the Dominion. Her tutors had spoken of them with faint amusement, as if they were children pretending to be warriors. Yet here was one who had carried her through fire when her own elite guards had fallen. His armor bore no sigils, no mark of noble blood, yet his presence felt stronger than any lord she had ever known. When Marcus finally allowed himself to rest, his head leaning back against the wall, Selira's thoughts would not quiet. She remembered her court, where every word was a trap and every smile hid ambition. No one acted without calculating gain. Yet this man, this human, had risked everything for nothing more than her life. She wondered what it would mean if her people saw him as she did now. The night was restless. Twice Marcus woke to distant sounds, his hand instantly on his rifle. Each time he stood scanning the shadows, prepared to fight with what little strength he had left. Selira felt something stir in her chest as she watched him. Not the pride of command, not the admiration of a ruler for her soldier, but something warmer, unfamiliar. For the first time in her life, she felt safe not because of her title, but because of the man beside her. At dawn, Marcus decided they could not stay hidden any longer. The battlefield would soon be swarming with scavengers and soldiers alike. He helped Selira to her feet, his arm steadying her as she leaned heavily against him. Every step was agony for her, but his grip never faltered. Together they moved toward the extraction point, where a signal beacon pulsed faintly in the distance. As they walked, Selira asked him questions in broken words. She wanted to know his name, his home, his people. He answered simply, telling her he was Sergeant Marcus Hale of the Terran Alliance from a small colony world far from her empire. There was no pride in his voice, only honesty. He spoke of his squad in fragments, his eyes hard when he remembered their loss. She realized then that he was as alone as she was, two survivors bound by chance. By the time they reached the beacon, Selira could barely stand. Marcus carried her once more, his legs trembling but unyielding. When the rescue craft finally descended, its engines roaring, Selira's attendants rushed forward in shock. They had expected to recover a body, not a living heir guarded by a wounded human soldier. Selira refused to release Marcus's arm as they led her aboard. Her people looked at him with suspicion, some even with disgust, but she silenced them with a single glance. He had saved her when no one else could. and she would not allow him to be cast aside. As the craft lifted away from the ruined moon, Salira lay back on the stretcher, her eyes never leaving Marcus. He sat quietly nearby, exhausted but still alert, his rifle resting across his knees. For the first time since the war had begun, she felt a strange kind of peace. The human had risked his life for hers without expecting anything in return. In that moment, Princess Salira of the Clith Dominion decided that she would never forget Sergeant Marcus Hale. No matter what her empire thought of him, the royal warship was a city in the sky, its silver halls gleaming with light that never dimmed. Human eyes found the brilliance almost painful, but Marcus Hale walked through it without flinching. He had been summoned to the heart of the Dominion capital, a place no human soldier had ever set foot in willingly. He wore no polished armor, no ceremonial robes, only the battered uniform he had carried from the battlefield. To the courtiers and guards who lined the passageways, he looked out of place, scarred, weary, a rough figure among silk and jewels. Their eyes followed him with a mix of curiosity and contempt. Some whispered as he passed, their voices sharp with insult, though Marcus could not understand their words. He understood their tone well enough. Beside him, Princess Salira moved with quiet authority. She still bore the marks of her wounds, but she walked with her head high. Where others saw a fragile heir rescued by luck, she saw the man who had carried her across fire. She had insisted he come with her, and not even the Council of Nobles had dared refuse her. The chamber of the High Council was vast, its ceiling lost in shadows. Thrones of stone and crystal circled the hall, each holding a figure draped in the colors of a ruling house. The air was heavy with tension, and the silence broke only when Salira spoke. "This is the human soldier," she declared, her voice ringing clear. "The one who saved me." Dozens of alien eyes turned toward Marcus. He met their gaze without bowing, his back straight, his expression calm. He had faced enemies with plasma rifles. He would not cower before a room full of politicians. One of the counselors, an older noble with cold silver eyes, leaned forward. His voice echoed like steel striking stone. "You would bring a Terran here, child? A creature of no house, no heritage, no worth? You insult your throne." Salira's jaw tightened, but Marcus spoke before she could reply. "I didn't come here to insult anyone," he said simply. "I came because she asked me to." The council chamber erupted with murmurs. The translator device at his collar carried his words into their language, blunt and unpolished. The counselors were used to flattery, to carefully measured phrases. To hear such plain truth shocked them. Another counselor, this one in golden robes, sneered. "Do you understand where you stand, human? This hall decides the fate of empires. You are nothing but dust beneath its feet." Marcus's eyes narrowed, but his voice stayed steady. "Maybe so. But when your princess was lying under rubble, when her guards were dead or gone, I was the one who carried her out. If that makes me dust, then at least I'm dust that did something." The silence that followed was heavier than any roar of battle. Even Salira turned to stare at him, her lips parted in surprise. No one in the Empire had ever spoken so directly to the council. The noble in golden robes rose in anger, but Salira raised her hand. "Enough," she commanded, her voice cutting through the hall. "You question him because he is human, but none of you were there. None of you shed blood for me when I was left behind. He did. He owes you nothing, yet you owe him my life." The words stunned the chamber. To admit such debt in front of rivals and enemies was unthinkable. Yet Salira did not falter. She looked at Marcus, and in her gaze was not only gratitude but a fire that dared anyone to challenge her truth. The High Counselor, the oldest among them, finally spoke. His voice was slow, measured, carrying the weight of centuries. "The human has shown courage, perhaps more than some who claim nobility, but courage can be dangerous. If word spreads, he will become a symbol, a weapon. Do we dare let one outsider hold such power over our people?" Murmurs rose again, louder this time. Some spoke of honoring Marcus, others of controlling him, and still others of removing him quietly before he became a problem. Through it all, Marcus stood silent. He was a soldier, not a politician, and he had no taste for their games. But he listened, and he understood one thing clearly. Saving Salira had put him in the middle of something far larger than himself. At last, the High Counselor turned his gaze back to Marcus. "Human, you have entered our halls. You have spoken boldly. You have risked much. But tell us this, what do you seek in return?" All eyes fixed on him. Salira held her breath. Marcus thought of his squad, the friends he had buried in silence. He thought of the battlefield where he should have died. And he thought of the princess, alive because he refused to walk away. Slowly, he answered, his words steady and true. I don't want your land. I don't want your titles. I don't want power. All I want is to know that her life wasn't saved for nothing. He looked at Scifi as he said it, and she felt the weight of those words settle deep in her heart. The chamber fell into silence once more. For the first time in living memory, the Dominion's High Council could not answer a human. The palace was never quiet. Even in the deep hours of night when the moons of the Dominion drifted across the sky, the air inside the towers carried whispers of servants, the shuffle of guards, and the hum of machines older than human history. For Marcus Hale, silence was something he had almost forgotten. He had been given a chamber to rest in after the council meeting, but he did not sleep easily. Too many eyes had watched him with suspicion. Too many words had hinted that his presence was more threat than honor. He sat awake in the dim glow of alien lights, sharpening a combat knife against a stone. The sound was soft but steady, keeping his thoughts focused. He knew this place was not safe. He had survived ambushes before, and every instinct told him that another was coming. He was right. The attack began without warning. A faint hiss, the whisper of a door sliding open when no one should have entered. Marcus moved before thought, dropping the knife and drawing his rifle. Shadows rushed into the room, tall figures cloaked in black armor, their weapons gleaming. Assassins. Their movements were fast. Silent meant to end him before he could react. The first one lunged, blade aimed for his chest. Marcus sidestepped, pulling the trigger. The blast of plasma filled the room, throwing the attacker back. The second was already on him, but Marcus slammed his elbow into the alien's throat, then fired again. The third came from behind, blade grazing his arm. He hissed in pain but spun, using the weight of his body to shove the attacker into the wall before finishing them with a shot. It was over in seconds, but his chamber was ruined, smoke rising from the walls. Marcus stood with chest heaving, blood seeping from a shallow cut across his arm. He knew they had not come for robbery. They had come for silence, to erase the human before he became too important. The commotion drew guards, and behind them came Princess Scifi herself, her gown hastily thrown over battle-worn armor. Her eyes widened when she saw the bodies, then narrowed with anger. I knew it, she whispered. There are traitors even here. She crossed to Marcus, ignoring the guards who tried to stop her. She looked at his wound, reaching for it before he pulled back slightly. It's nothing, he muttered. To you. Perhaps, she said, her voice low. But to me, it is proof that you are being hunted because of me. The guards knelt beside the dead assassins, exchanging uneasy glances. No one admitted it aloud, but all knew what it meant. Someone within the Dominion wanted Marcus gone, and perhaps Scifi as well. In the following days, the palace became a cage. Marcus was assigned escorts, but he trusted none of them. He stayed close to Scifi, and she insisted he remain near her chambers. At council gatherings, he saw the way nobles whispered when she defended him. Some admired her boldness, but others looked at him as if he were a shadow hanging over their empire. One evening, as they walked through the palace gardens under the glow of crystal lamps, Scifi turned to him. Do you understand what is happening, Marcus? You are more than a soldier now. To my enemies, you are proof that humans cannot be ignored. To my rivals, you are an obstacle. To me, she hesitated, then smiled faintly. To me, you are the reason I am still alive. Marcus looked at her, then at the stars above. I never asked for this, he said. I just did what anyone should have done. She shook her head gently. No, not anyone. Only you. Their conversation was cut short by another attack, this time in the open. Arrows of light streaked across the garden, scorching the ground. Guards fell before they could even draw their weapons. Marcus reacted instantly, throwing Scifi behind a stone pillar as enemy soldiers in dark armor poured from the shadows. The fight was fierce. Marcus fired until his rifle overheated, then drew his knife. He fought with raw instinct, ducking and striking using every bit of training his years as a soldier had given him. The ants were larger, stronger, but they were not prepared for human unpredictability. Marcus turned fallen weapons against their owners, using their own blades and rifles until the garden floor was littered with bodies. Scifi watched in awe. She had seen warriors fight before, trained champions of her empire, But Marcus was different. He fought not with the rhythm of discipline but with the desperate fury of survival. It was ugly, brutal, and terrifying, and yet it kept her alive. When the last assassin fell, Marcus staggered back to her, breathing hard. His armor was burned, his skin cut, but his eyes were sharp. "Are you hurt?" he asked. She shook her head. "No, because of you." Her attendants rushed in, horrified at the sight, but Celira ignored them. She reached for Marcus's hand, gripping it tightly despite the blood. "You see now," she said softly. "They will never stop. Not while you stand beside me."
"But I will not let them take you."
"You saved me, Marcus Hale. Now I will protect you even if it means defying the Empire itself." Marcus did not answer. He only squeezed her hand once before letting go, his gaze drifting back to the stars. He knew she meant her words, but he also knew what it would cost her. He was no noble, no prince, only a human soldier. Yet somehow he had become the center of a storm that could tear an empire apart. And deep inside, he wondered if saving her had saved him too, or doomed them both. The chamber of the Grand Council was filled with light that fell from crystals high above, painting the polished floor in silver. Marcus Hale stood at the center, surrounded by a circle of nobles who wore robes brighter than the stars. He had never felt more out of place in his life. His uniform was scorched, his boots dusty from battle, and yet every eye in the room was fixed on him as if he were a rare animal brought in for display. Princess Celira walked beside him, her presence as commanding as ever. She wore her armor, repaired but still scarred, refusing to hide the proof of her survival. Her voice carried across the hall when she spoke. "This is Sergeant Marcus Hale of the Terran Alliance. He is the soldier who carried me from the ruins when all others failed. His courage is the reason I live." The nobles murmured, their voices low but sharp. Some leaned forward in curiosity, others in disgust. The High Counselor, who sat on the tallest throne, raised his hand and silence fell. "Human," he said, his voice deep and measured. "You stand in the hall where the fate of empires is decided. Speak carefully. Tell us why you are here." Marcus cleared his throat. He felt the weight of the hall pressing down on him, but he refused to bow. "I'm here because she asked me to be," he said simply, nodding toward Celira. "I didn't come to make speeches. I didn't come for rewards. I only did what I thought was right." The words echoed awkwardly in the vast chamber. To the nobles, who were used to polished speeches and hidden meanings, his honesty was almost strange. One of them, draped in red silk, stood sharply. "He speaks like a child," the noble said. "Do you expect us to honor a creature who does not even understand our ways?" Marcus turned to him, his voice steady. "Maybe I don't understand your ways. But I understand this. When the princess was left under stone, dying, none of you were there. None of you carried her across fire. I did. So if you think that makes me less, fine. But I was the one who kept her alive when it mattered." The council chamber fell into silence. A ripple of surprise moved across the nobles. No one had ever spoken to them like that, not even their own. Celira's eyes shone with something fierce, almost proud. Another noble, this one wearing golden armor, laughed coldly. "Bravery in battle does not make a leader. It makes a weapon. And weapons can be dangerous if left in the wrong hands. This human could become a rallying point, a symbol. Do we dare let such a thing grow among us?" Murmurs rose again. Some nodded in agreement. Others whispered about honoring Marcus instead of fearing him. The chamber was split. Marcus stood still, his jaw tight, knowing the choice they made here might decide whether he lived or died. Celira stepped forward before anyone else could speak. "You fear him because he is different," she said, her voice sharp as a blade. "But he has already shown more loyalty to me than half the nobles in this room. He fought when others ran. He gave his blood without demand for reward. If you call that dangerous, then perhaps it is because you have forgotten what true courage looks like." Her words sent another wave of murmurs through the chamber. The High Counselor raised his hand again, and silence returned. His ancient eyes studied Marcus for a long time, as though weighing the truth of Celira's words. "Human," he said at last, "tell us then, what do you seek in return for your deeds? Wealth, land, command of armies? Name your price." Marcus looked at him, then at Celira. He thought of his fallen squad, of the war that had taken everything from him. He thought of the moment he had lifted her from the rubble, when she had been only a stranger. Slowly he shook his head. "I don't want your land. I don't want your armies. I don't want power. All I want is to know that saving her life meant something. His words were quiet, but they struck harder than any demand. Celira's chest tightened as she heard them. To her, it felt like a vow spoken in front of the stars themselves. The chamber fell silent again, deeper this time. Some nobles lowered their eyes, ashamed by the simplicity of his request. Others clenched their fists, angered that such plain honesty had swayed even a few hearts. The High Counselor leaned back in his throne. His expression did not change, but his voice carried a weight that silenced all whispers. So be it. The human will remain as guest of the Dominion, protected by royal command. His deeds will be recorded, his presence recognized. But let all remember, this is not the end of his story. A symbol has been born today, whether he wishes it or not. Celira exhaled slowly, relief washing through her. Marcus stood straight, not showing the exhaustion that pressed on his shoulders. He knew the counselor was right. By saving her, he had stepped into a storm far greater than any battlefield. When the council was dismissed, Celira walked with Marcus through the long hall. Her voice was quiet but firm. You spoke with no fear. Even they could not ignore your words. Do you see now why I keep you close? Marcus glanced at her, his expression calm. I didn't come here to change anything, he said. But if staying by your side means I can make sure you live, then I'll keep doing it. For a moment, Celira's usual composure slipped, and a small, genuine smile crossed her face. She did not answer. She didn't need to. The palace trembled with the sound of battle. Marcus Hale had fought in ruined cities and across barren moons, but he had never heard anything like this. Explosions shook the very foundation of the Dominion's capital. Walls of light once meant to protect the royal seat now burned under enemy fire. The Civil War had come to the heart of the empire, and Marcus found himself once more at the center of chaos. He stood beside Princess Celira in the Great Hall, where courtiers fled in panic as guards rushed to defend the palace. The vast windows lit with fire from outside, their golden glow now stained red. Celira remained calm, though her eyes betrayed her fear. She turned to Marcus, her voice low but urgent. They are not here for conquest. They are here for me. Marcus gripped his rifle tighter. Then they'll have to go through me first. The first wave of attackers burst into the hall moments later. Rebels, clad in blackened armor, shouting their war cries as they fired. The guards met them with blades and rifles, but the fighting quickly turned brutal and close. Marcus threw himself into the fray, moving with the raw precision of a soldier who had lived through too many battles. His shots struck true, cutting down enemies before they could reach Celira. When his rifle overheated, he pulled the knife from his belt, striking fast, never pausing. Around him, the battle roared, but his FO. Kar stayed on one thing, keeping her alive. Celira did not cower. She drew a ceremonial blade from her side, one that had hung for years as a symbol rather than a weapon. Now it gleamed in her hands as she fought beside Marcus. She was not trained like he was, but she moved with determination, striking down an enemy who came too close. Marcus saw her strength and felt something stir in his chest. She was more than royalty. She was a fighter who refused to surrender her life to fate. The attackers pressed harder, wave after wave. Marcus and Celira were driven back into a smaller chamber as flames licked the walls. Marcus slammed the door shut and jammed it with debris, breathing hard. Celira's face was streaked with sweat, her armor dented. For a moment they stood together in silence, the world outside screaming. Why do you keep doing this? She asked suddenly. Her voice shook not with fear but with something deeper. Why throw yourself into every fire, every blade for me? You could run. No one would blame you. Marcus looked at her, his chest heaving. Because your life matters to me. His voice was rough, but the words carried a weight that silence could not deny. I've lost everyone else. My squad, my brothers, all gone. I wasn't able to save them. But I saved you. And I'll keep saving you as long as I can still stand. Celira stared at him, her breath catching. For the first time since she had met him, her strength wavered, but not from weakness. Her heart pounded, her throat tight. She stepped closer, her eyes locked on his. Then know this, Marcus Hale. You are not just my protector. You are more than that to me. Her words were almost drowned out as the door shuddered under the weight of more attackers. Marcus turned sharply, rifle ready, but her hand caught his arm. For a moment their eyes met, and in that silent exchange lay everything neither of them had dared to say aloud. The door burst open. Enemy soldiers poured into the room, their blades raised. Marcus fired until his weapon screamed from heat, then fought with bare fists and steel. He blocked a strike meant for Celira, his arm burning with pain, and shoved the enemy back. Celira fought too, staying close, her blade flashing whenever an attacker drew near. Together, they stood against impossible odds. It was not graceful. It was not perfect. But it was unbreakable. When the last of the rebels finally fell, silence filled the chamber. The floor was littered with broken armor, the air thick with smoke. Marcus leaned heavily against the wall, blood running down his arm, his strength almost gone. Celira rushed to him, her hand pressing against his wound. "You cannot keep doing this," she whispered, her eyes wet. Marcus gave a faint, tired smile. "I'll stop when you're safe." She shook her head fiercely, her grip tightening on him. "No, you're not only here to keep me alive. I will not let you die for me. Not again. Not ever." The palace walls still burned, and the war outside had not ended, but in that moment, within that chamber, the bond between them became stronger than steel. She had seen him fight without hesitation. He had seen her refuse to yield. And both knew that whatever storms lay ahead, they would face them not as ruler and soldier, but as two souls bound by trust, sacrifice, and something deeper neither could deny any longer. The fires of battle were gone, but the scars of war still marked the Dominion's capital. Towers that once shone like silver now bore cracks and burns. The great palace had survived, but only barely. Its walls still trembled with the memory of the siege, and its halls echoed with arguments as nobles fought over the future of the empire. Marcus Hale stood on the balcony outside the royal chambers, staring at the alien sky. The stars were sharp and endless, but to him they felt strangely close, as if they were watching. His arm was bandaged, his body sore, yet he stood tall. He had faced worse. What weighed heavier than wounds was the choice waiting for him. Behind him, the chamber doors opened. Princess Celira stepped out, her steps slow, her eyes tired but unbroken. She had spent hours with the council, listening to endless debates. Some nobles had called for Marcus to be given command of Dominion armies, to turn him into a living banner of courage. Others had demanded his exile, even his death, fearing what his presence meant. She joined him at the balcony, her gaze on the stars. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then she whispered, "They do not see you as a man, Marcus. They see you as a symbol. Some want to lift you high. Others want to crush you. And none of them care what you want." Marcus gave a short laugh, bitter but quiet. "That's nothing new. Back home, it was the same. Soldiers don't get asked what they want. We just get told where to bleed." Celira turned to him, her eyes sharp. "Then tell me here and now, what do you want? Not for them, not for me, but for yourself." The question hung between them like a blade. Marcus thought of Earth, of the Terran Alliance. Humanity was still small compared to the Dominion, still climbing, still fragile. If he stayed here, he risked being seen as a traitor to his own kind. If he returned, he risked being remembered only as a footnote, a man who once saved a princess and then faded away. He looked at Celira, the woman who had fought beside him, bled beside him, trusted him when no one else did. In her eyes, he saw not a throne, not an empire, but the life he had almost lost on that ruined moon. "What I want," he said slowly, "is to know that my choices are mine, not theirs, not the council's, not the alliance's. Mine." Celira's lips parted, and for the first time in many days, a small smile touched her face. "Then perhaps we want the same thing." The next day, the High Council gathered again in the Grand Chamber. The nobles spoke loudly, their voices full of plans for Marcus. They offered him titles, ships, lands across the Dominion. Others demanded he be sent away, warning that a human with such influence could topple centuries of rule. The chamber boiled with words, but it all fell silent when Marcus and Celira entered. The High Counselor leaned forward. "Human," he said, his voice carrying across the hall. "The time has come. Choose your place. Will you serve the Dominion, command its forces, carry its banner? Or will you leave, return to your people, and let this empire forget you?" Every gaze in the chamber turned toward him. Marcus stood straight, his voice steady. "I'm not here to be your weapon. I'm not here to be your servant. I'm not even here to be remembered. I'm here because I chose to save her life. That was my decision. And my decision now is the same. I will walk beside her. Not above, not below, beside." Gasps rippled through the nobles. To reject the power of the Dominion was unheard of. To speak of equality with their princess was almost unthinkable. But Celira stepped forward, her chin high, her voice firm. "And I accept. Marcus Hale will not be my soldier nor my servant. He will be my partner. Together we will shape what comes next." The chamber erupted in shouts, half in fury, half in shock. But neither Marcus nor Celira wavered. They had faced fire and blade together. Words would not move them now. Later, when the chamber had emptied and the argument still echoed in distant halls, Marcus and Celira stood again on the balcony. The city stretched before them, broken but alive, its people slowly rebuilding. "Do you regret it?" Celira asked softly. Marcus shook his head. "No. For the first time in a long time, I feel like I made the right choice. Not for orders. Not for duty. For me." He glanced at her, his eyes steady. "And for you." She looked back at him, and for once her royal composure faded. She let the warmth of her true feelings show, her hand brushing his. "Then whatever storms come, we will face them together." The stars above shone brighter as the night deepened. A human soldier who should have died on a ruined moon now stood at the side of an alien princess, not as a prisoner of fate, but as a man who had chosen his own path. And in that choice lay the power to change not only her empire but perhaps the whole galaxy.